This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me, you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is August 13th, 2020, and this is episode 202.
I'm Scott Deluneboom.
I'm Ian Bushfield.
And I'm Shannon Waters.
Welcome back, Shannon.
Good to be here.
We're going to talk with you today about the end of the summer hybrid session, which may be the last session of 2020. Maybe there'll be an election. Who knows? We'll discuss it all. And then we'll bring on my partner, Sonia, to talk about the school restart plan. Thanks to the 102 people who contribute to the show every month, help keep us growing at patreon.com/Politicoast. Politicoast is also in partnership with Shannon Waters' own BC Today, British Columbia's daily newsletter dedicated exclusively to BC politics. Sign up for a free trial to have unique coverage of the BC legislature delivered to your inbox every morning. Listeners to Politicoast enter the offer code CITIZEN for access to a special rate. For your free 2-week trial of the newsletter, go to politicstoday.news/free-trial. Let's jump into it. The ledge is out for summer. Shannon,
Yay!
you had a nice description of the hybrid sitting when I asked you about it.
Thanks, I hate it. I wouldn't say it hasn't gone well. There's a lot of things that I find frustrating about the hybrid setting. I'm sure that I'm not alone in this, but like many things are just more frustrating. It's more disjointed. Things like division votes take forever. You can't, like, one of my favorite things about question period had been being able to see, all the MLAs down on the floor of the chamber, and you could see like who is bored and doodling and who is really frustrated. You could hear some of the heckling and that kind of thing, which has kind of disappeared during the summer sitting. Not the heckling entirely, but anybody who's not physically in the chamber, their mics get muted when it's not their turn, so you are missing a lot of the color. And it's felt like a slog. I was talking to my boss, Alison Smith, who works out in Ontario and covers the legislature out there. And we were talking about how summer sittings just somehow feel like more of a drag than being in the legislature in the fall or in the spring.
Are MLAs able to see one another? Like, I know they're using Zoom, so do they get gallery view, whereas we have to look at the speaker view?
Sure how it works for the MLA, like what their perspective is like. What happens if you're in the chamber? They've installed all these big, huge video screens. There's 4 of them that were put up in the chamber to make the hybrid sitting this summer possible. And typically what happens is one of them is dedicated to the room. So you can see the little tiny thumbnails, almost indistinguishable, of all of the MLAs who are in attendance virtually. And then so there's 2 on each side of the chamber. So 1 on each side are dedicated to the room view, and then there is 1 on each side that shows whoever is speaking, if they're speaking virtually. So you get like this close-up of whoever it is who has the floor. But I don't know what the MLAs themselves can see. So it is kind of similar to the Hansard view. It is restrictive. You don't get as much of, people's expressions and stuff like that. Although, as we talked about the last time you guys had me on, there are some interesting backgrounds and you get a peek into some of the MLAs' living rooms, which has been kind of fun.
Who has the best background?
Oh, that is a tough choice and probably a matter of taste. There have been a few interesting bookshelves that have come out. I want to say Coralie Oakes had a very interesting setup at one point, just in terms of sort of camera angle, and she had her bookcase sort of on the side. I still am wondering what Bob Deeth has behind his giant BC flag that is the backdrop for whatever his room is. But you just see a giant flag of British Columbia behind him when he's speaking.
One of the things we were discussing before we hit record was that I guess the technical challenges still haven't been fully sorted out. Like, are they still struggling with the mute button?
A little bit. It definitely comes up. I would say almost every day there will be an individual who begins their remarks or their response, and then the speaker has to say, "Member, your microphone appears to be on mute." I wouldn't say it's been, a huge deal, but there have been occasions where they've been doing division votes, which have to be vocal. For other votes, MLAs can hold up these voting cards to show how they're voting, but when it comes to division, they actually have to say, "I vote aye" or "I vote nay." And there have been a few times where an MLA will get a chance, to say their vote, and they don't, and then they give them another chance and they don't, so then they just move on, and then they have to come back to them at the end of things. So yes, we are still having some technical difficulties in the chamber.
Virtual voting really feels like one of those things that's much easier, like using the polling options or any number of things in here, but we're stuck on this. You must say it to be recorded.
Well,
yes, you must say it, or you must physically demonstrate it, which is what happens in the chamber with a standing vote. So they've kind of preserved that aspect of proceedings.
I've been watching more of the Vancouver Council than anyone really should, and I swear, like every third vote, someone needs a vote assist on their remote thing. So I don't know if that's just Vancouver's unique style of dysfunction, or if that's just not as easy as it looks.
I guess that is just 11 people, so 87 would be much more difficult. Of all those MLAs, though, have there been any who've been real standouts in this virtual setting? Like, have any really taken to it and are able to wield the camera to their advantage?
None that have like super stood out to me. The ones who caught my attention, honestly, are the ones who are in the House on a day-to-day basis. So for the government, that is typically mostly ministers, and a lot of those who are here in Victoria or close to it. So the Premier has been around through most of the session, although we hadn't seen him in question period all that often, at least not responding until today. He took most of the questions in the final question period today. And also today, they were working on the Finance Ministry estimates, which are always a highlight for me, partly because Finance Minister Carol James is such a consummate politician, very polished, everything goes smoothly. She's always very cordial, which I find impressive in an environment that can be as sort of conflict heavy and oppositional as the legislature. And then on the Liberal side, you have the finance critics, both of whom are also women. Currently, it's Shirley Bond and Stephanie Cadieux. And Stephanie Cadieux stepped in to replace Tracy Reddy's when she got sick last year. So she was pulled off her critic portfolio because she wasn't able to come into the legislature, was focused on her recovery. But she actually did participate in the finance ministry estimates a bit this time round. And I always find it fun, even though, a lot of people would find it very dry material, just to watch these women who are sort of political powerhouses here in the province go back and forth. Yeah, I mean, the other thing that kind of came up recently, actually, Vancouver Sun reporter Rob Shaw pointed it out. I'd missed the first introduction. So today, Jennifer Rice, who is an NDP MLA, had her son in the House, her infant son, whose name is Lua, and introduced him. And David Eby, the Attorney General, also introduced the newest addition to his family earlier in the session. So even though we're having a hybrid session, and mostly, not as many people in the House, we have still had the babies coming in who have only been allowed in the House fairly recently.
I take it none have brought their babies to a virtual sitting, like none are behind their webcam with their baby or their cat in their lap.
There has been one. Again, it was David Eby, and this came from a tweet from another NDP MLA who said, and I can't entirely confirm this because the shot was not super focused or like completely on center on the Attorney General, but reportedly he was changing a diaper during one of the votes that was taking place in the House. So still taking on those childcare duties even when he's at home.
Let's jump into what actually got done. But before that, there are a couple of major bills that didn't get through. Bill C-17, the Clean Energy Amendment Act, and Bill 22, the Mental Health Amendment Act. How come those didn't get passed, and what are you hearing about whether they'll be coming back?
Well, with Bill 22, it kind of depends on who you ask. When It was first announced that the bill wouldn't pass during the summer. Mental Health and Addictions Minister Judy Darcy said that there wasn't enough time to deal with the legislation. To have it go through the process. Committee stage can be quite involved and take a while, particularly when other MLAs have concerns about the content of a bill. And so Minister Darcy said, we don't have time to do this. We're going to wait until the fall. And coincidentally, that will give us time to do some further consultations with people. And there were varied groups of people who had issues with this bill. The same day that was announced, the premier said that they didn't have the support in the legislature to pass it, which later also appeared to be true. The Green Caucus came out and said, we can't support this bill as it currently stands. There needs to be more consultation. They flagged Indigenous people who had concerns about the bill's effect on Indigenous youth. And then the Liberal mental health and addictions critic Jane Thornthwaite came out and said, nobody supports this bill. So could be either or, a lack of time, a lack of support. Either way, it's not going anywhere until at least this fall.
And the Clean Energy Amendment Act was one that's faced some other opposition from the Green Party as well.
Yes. So this is a bill that would make a lot of changes to the way BC Hydro operates on various fronts. It is a beast of a bill. And the issue that has sort of come to the fore is around the requirement, BC Hydro's self-sufficiency requirement, having the utility purchase power from within the province rather than purchasing power from sources outside the province. And the crux of the issue that is causing problems are changes that could, sorry, let me collect my thoughts for a second here. So the crux of the issue that is causing problems for the bill are a group called independent power producers. So small scale power projects in the province. A lot of them run of river, and many of them have Indigenous involvement. Some of them are owned and operated by First Nations. Others have First Nations investment in them. And the worry is that allowing BC Hydro to purchase power from outside of the province could put these projects at a disadvantage and potentially end some of them because the cost wouldn't be competitive compared to where BC Hydro could get this extra power from. So the Greens have also flagged concerns about the definition of clean energy within the bill and proposed some amendments to change it. Now, the bill never made it past first reading, So basically it was introduced, the minister talked about it, and then it just sat there. And then, so there was some conflict between our independent MLA, Andrew Weaver, who used to be the leader of the BC Green Party, and he criticized his former party for proposing these amendments, saying essentially that they should have waited until it got to committee stage to propose amendments. That's how the process works, et cetera, et cetera. Weaver has his own amendments that he said he wanted to put forward if the bill made it to committee stage. But at the beginning of this week, Government House Leader Mike Farnworth confirmed that it too would not be going anywhere this summer. And so I guess we'll see what happens with it when we come back, probably at some point this fall.
What was the definitional issue the Green Party had with clean power?
Basically, they sort of wanted to make it more specific. I don't have the amendment itself in front of me. It was fairly extensive, but from what I remember, the focus was ensuring that it was, with renewable energy and sort of a more technical definition around what clean energy really means for the province. So it'll be interesting to see if those amendments are incorporated before the Greens have a chance to propose them at committee stage, or if, the government will sort of give the Greens the opportunity to put these amendments forward and then support them.
Of all the criticisms Andrew Weaver has had for his former fellow caucus members this, year, bringing amendments forward too early or not following the exact right procedure is among the wonkiest and tamest, I would say, of the criticisms. He's been rather acerbic this term.
Little bit. He's definitely thrown some shade at his former party on a couple of different levels. his sort of description of the way the Greens were handling Bill 17, the Clean Energy Amendment Act, was throwing the baby out with the bathwater, sort of acknowledging that, yes, there are some problems with the bill, but it's fixable, saying that you're not going to support it, and forcing the government to sort of rethink the whole thing. He was kind of framing that as, dramatic or extreme. And I don't have his specific amendments in front of me. I believe they're actually on the order paper, or they were recently. To me, they seem quite similar. Like he was addressing many of the same issues around sort of what specifically we mean by clean energy and the focus on, developing renewables and making them part of BC Hydro's power package.
The Green Party to come out against the Clean Energy Act just because a bunch of it doesn't actually happen within BC. I kind of get you always want to be supporting jobs in the province and whatnot, but if you can get cheap, clean power from Washington State, why not?
Yeah, I've heard a bunch of concerns on this front from sort of various aspects. The one issue that sort of strikes me that hadn't come up a lot in discourse around, potential problems or things that could be improved about the bill was when BC passed the legislation to sort of bring the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples into provincial law. That part of that bill commits the province to ensuring that any future legislation upholds the principles of UNDRIP, and that sort of includes economic development and self-determination opportunities for Indigenous people. And potentially there might be a bit of a conflict between what that bill mandates, as I see it anyways, what that bill mandates and the effect that shutting down a bunch of these independent power production projects could have on Indigenous people. And that is sort of the criticism that has come from some Indigenous stakeholders, like that it doesn't fit with this commitment that BC just made last year.
Yeah, it kind of reflects a different approach to the issues that I think the BC Liberals took, which was to really try to encourage these types of developments and just try to help communities ideally fund themselves in the longer term and economically develop, whether that was through LNG or through independent, these IPP projects or even pipelines in some cases.
The criticism of the IPPs has been that the power, like the contracts that were signed and the power rates that were committed to are too expensive. And so that is sort of part of why it's a big issue to allow BC Hydro to purchase cheaper power from elsewhere. That could potentially go quite badly for a lot of these projects.
Well, let's switch into some of the government's notches on the win column. They did manage to pass the rest of their legislative agenda this session. Among the big bills in there was the ICBC amendments, the overhaul to enhanced care, some of the changes to the Strata Act, although those weren't ultimately that substantive, I think was the main criticism. And then a bunch of stuff related to the pandemic. I'm sure I'm missing some others. What did you see the government highlighting the most, and or what did the opposition fight most tooth and nail on?
You've kind of touched on them already, like the ICBC bill and the Strata Issues bill, which the government has described as its first steps to deal with this issue around strata insurance premiums. Those were the ones that really took up a lot of time this session. There was extended debate at committee. In some cases, I believe amendments were proposed, and I can't remember if any passed now that I think about it. Anyways, those took up a lot of time for sure. The ICBC bill was probably sort of the flagship piece of legislation that passed during the summer session because the government had already set this timeline to shift to the enhanced care model by next spring. So it sort of needed to get passed in order to lay the groundwork for making that change. And it's basically like that is the NDP's sort of solution to fixing ICBC. You know, they've done a bunch of other stuff at this point. They've made a lot of changes, but this is sort of the package that is supposed to both deliver cheaper insurance premiums for people and better quality care for people who are injured in vehicle collisions, including people who are at fault for those collisions, which had been identified as sort of a big gap in the way our system currently works. You know, people who, you know, potentially just through bad luck can be found at fault for very serious accidents, can be badly hurt in very serious accidents. And under the current system, how much support they can get is kind of dependent on how at fault they are found to be. So that's going to be it'll be interesting to see if the bill lives up to, you know, the government has talked it up a lot. They have, you know, poured a lot into this legislation. David Eby has talked it up all over the place. He has had to, you know, fend off a lot of criticism, both from the Liberals and from the insurance industry over the bill and the government's approach to ICBC in general, you know, and the promises sound really nice. Who doesn't want cheaper car insurance and better care if you end up getting hurt in an accident? The question is it going to do exactly what the government says it's going to do at this point?
And undoubtedly, we'll see a bunch of challenges from various lawyers' associations and others to try to take it on legally, but in the meantime,
I believe the Attorney General has basically said that he believes the odds of it being challenged are 100%. You know, there will be some kind of legal challenge to it, likely coming from, you know, someone like the Trial Lawyers Association, who really don't like the bill because it removes to a large degree the role of lawyers from within the system.
There are many nice lawyers, but don't know that this has been the most helpful realm for them in many cases. There are some victims in these situations or people injured who definitely need representation. There will still be a realm for that, but I don't know. I'm pessimistic about the current system, and I don't know, maybe I'm on side with some of the changes, but like you say, lots still needs to be seen.
Yeah, and there's definitely not a lot of love or trust for ICBC out there. And the way this system works is the Attorney General has described it as sort of removing the conflict for ICBC, because in the current system, they're sort of both responsible for providing care for people who are hurt and also responsible for keeping costs down on the other side. So that doesn't, you can't really do both of those things most of the time. But, you know, for a lot of people, if you say ICBC is, you know, with the help of health professionals going to determine sort of the care you need, not a lot of people really like that idea either. And I can completely understand that. So we'll see how it goes next spring.
But before we get to next spring, there's probably going to be a fall session. Do we know what's going to be coming up for that?
Right now, we don't know for certain that there's going to be a fall session. It is in the legislative calendar. You know, it's still there from when the calendar was published early in the year before all this pandemic stuff happened. But talking to Government House Leader Mike Farnworth earlier this week, he was asked, you know, is there going to be a fall session? A lot of uncertainty caused by the pandemic on various angles. And he was like, well, we're not sure. We're keeping an eye on case numbers. We're, you know, trying to figure it out. He did mention that the government was going to have 2 pieces of legislation on the order paper ready to go should there be a fall session, and said they're also working on bills to further their legislative agenda. But, you know, if everything goes really sideways and, you know, we go back to, say, where we were in early mid-April, end of March, where sort of everything was shut down, I shudder to think of what an entirely virtual legislature session would look like. It gives me a headache just thinking about it. But if we do have a fall session, I would expect it to be much like the summer one has been, where we're going to have some MLAs in the House, you know, 24 of them or so, and then most of the rest of them participating virtually. I can't speak to what the government's, you know, legislative priorities that are outstanding. I mean, maybe we see something else on the strata insurance side of things. Maybe there's more that's related to the pandemic. Maybe some more changes around labor standards. That was another big bill that passed this summer. Changes to the way WorkSafe BC and workers' compensation work. Yeah, so we'll see. Currently, we're scheduled to go back. I believe it's the 5th of October, the first week in October. So if things get really crazy in the next few weeks, maybe that gets pushed back a couple of weeks. Maybe the fall session is only 3 weeks long. Like so many things these days, I just don't know what the future holds.
One of the things Horgan talked about quite a bit earlier in the pandemic and celebrated a month ago was this commitment from the federal government to have paid sick leave. But we haven't heard anything about that in almost a full month. I imagine some of the provinces at least will need additional legislation. Has there been any updates? Has Horgan talked at all about that since
Not
Trudeau
really.
said
That's
it was
one of my
going to be a
list of
thing and then
questions
it's
to
not been a
ask the
thing?
Premier about during one of his weekly avails. Haven't got the opportunity in quite a while now. But yes, I mean, that certainly has to be something. I mean, it was top of mind a couple of months ago. Horgan was getting, shout outs from other premiers from driving the issue, from Ontario Conservative Premier Doug Ford, of all people, giving Horgan credit for pushing this issue. But it really has just pretty much entirely disappeared. I've heard nothing about it in weeks now.
Well, cases started to spike. You'd hope they'd get onto that pretty quick.
You would, also because BC doesn't mandate any paid sick leave. We had that emergency one-day sort of mini session in March, and they passed legislation that entitles people to 3 unpaid days, as well as preventing employers from terminating people due to COVID-19, like if they got sick. But for a lot of people, if you're not getting paid to stay home and you just feel like you maybe have the sniffles or a headache or something like that, the math there doesn't work out for a lot of people. Like a day's worth of wages are just too important. And the thing that this pandemic has really changed is that if you wake up in the morning and you don't feel sort of very well in any respect at all, you need to stay home. And right now, workers in BC don't really have that option if they're living, paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been rewatching some old episodes of Mike Holmes' show, and he's talking about how he's almost like never taken a sick day in his life, and his motto was always just like, you work sick. And I'm just watching this with like horror and disgust in contemporary settings, and he's like on the show like coughing and wheezing, and I'm like, this is awful. And I get like the financial implications for him, and he needed to do that in a way, but it's not good for our culture.
No, and it's not that quick getting the results back. So I actually woke up not feeling great a couple days back, went in for a COVID test. It took a little over 2 days to get it back at like noon 2 days after, and I was fine. I was set up to work from home, so no big deal. But, I could definitely, it was still nevertheless disruptive. And I imagine for a lot of people that would be much worse. Yeah, it came back negative, thankfully, but it's definitely a problem.
Good. Glad to hear it. Yeah, it's one of those things that, there's so much going on right now. There's so many different issues that, day to day are super important or mind-blowing or depressing or whatever. But this shift of, if you are sick, you need to stay home is such a huge one for our culture. Like, we're just all so used to, having the sniffles. Like, if you can get up out of bed, you can go to work. That's fine. And, spreading around cold and flu germs isn't great, but by and large, we're just used to that. It happens. I used to work in a radio newsroom where we all shared mics and were often in close proximity to each other. And basically, like all cold and flu season, we all just passed around this, like there was always somebody who had a runny nose or a hoarse voice or a cough, and that was just sort of the way things were. And, as we go forward, that's just something that can't happen anymore, or really shouldn't happen anymore.
Well, we're all safely remote over the internet on our recordings for quite a while now. But one of the things that the Premier has been talking about, where he hasn't been talking about sick leave, is, I guess, fall election speculation. And that's been the thing that seems to be buzzing the Ledge press gallery and people there. I don't want to spend too much more time on it. We've talked about it a couple times in the last couple of weeks, but what's been your perspective on this, Shannon? Is this real or just hot air late in August?
Horgan has certainly had lots of opportunities to close the door on the possibility of a fall election at least, and has declined to do so. His stance is basically, we're a minority government, like I can't guarantee any of this. He has said, we're focused on dealing with the pandemic, we're focused on delivering services that British Columbians need, pandemic or not, but he's declined to close the door on a fall election. He's also declined to, during this week's media availability, he was asked, whether he might talk to the Greens and the Liberals and they could all make a pact and just decide to stick to the scheduled election date next October. And he sort of harkened back to the partisanship of the legislature. It was like, have you watched Question Period? Like, it's nasty and things are rash and people, there's tempers flaring and this kind of stuff. Like, that's politics. That's the way the system works. I would be very surprised if we go to the polls before next spring. I could see spring or summer being sort of preferable to potentially doing a fall election, depending on what we see this fall with case numbers and also co-infections with the flu, possibly, or the pressure that influenza also places on our testing and hospital systems. But also, I've been in the press gallery for almost 3 years now, and the speculation about when there is going to be election has almost never stopped. We got a couple of months during the pandemic where nobody floated the idea of having an election anytime soon. And then as soon as the legislature went back, Horgan made his opportunity comment, and we've just been going since then.
Yeah, and the break tend to turn that up to 11 because I guess nobody has anything else to talk about.
Well, and it's one of those things that, the other parties can fundraise off of. Certainly within a couple of hours of the Premier making his latest remarks, where he didn't say, no, we won't have an election this fall, the Liberals were sending fundraising emails over the possibility of there being an election this fall. I think one of the things that is starting to sink in now is just how long the pandemic could be hanging around for. Dr. Theresa Tam is now talking about potentially having to think about physical distancing and look at wearing masks when that's not possible for 2 to 3 years. And if that is the case, we will have a provincial election under pandemic circumstances. We are bound to go back to the polls by mid-October of next year. So Elections BC is supposed to be preparing. Dr. Bonnie Henry, has talked about the fact that public health officials have been talking to Elections BC about how you would hold provincial elections under pandemic circumstances. And there are by-elections that are going to be coming up. Certainly at the municipal level, there are already a couple that are scheduled to take place even this fall. And then we have a seat in the legislature that is going to be vacated at the end of this month. Liberal MLA Tracy Reddy's for Surrey White Rock is going to be stepping down. She's going to go run Science World, which honestly sounds like way more fun than being stuck in the legislature on a regular basis. So her seat will be open and it will have to be filled, or a by-election will have to be called within 6 months of her vacating it.
So you've been listening to the Premier much closer than I have. The way the news has kind of been reporting the election talk from him, it's a kind of coy, maybe, maybe not sort of thing. Is that how it's actually happening, or is it more of a, well, I just don't want to commit to anything one way or the other because it's a minority government?
The minority government explanation is true. They are a minority, and if things, either potentially went sideways with the Greens, or, even just the numbers in the house, like people get sick or have accidents or whatever and prevented from coming into the house, that changes the voting numbers. That being said, we don't have a confidence vote coming up until next spring. So if we did have a fall election, it would be the government, it would be the NDP triggering it, which I think they would pay a price for. For Horgan, though, part of me thinks about what he's like in question period and how he sort of likes to poke the opposition, and part of me thinks that he just sort of enjoys being able to publicly yank their chain at this point, which is something that he can do because he gets the microphone during these weekly pressers.
Well, whether there's an election, a fall sitting, or just a second wave that's terrifying, I'm sure this fall will be very busy and we'll have lots to talk about in any case.
When is BC Poly ever boring or lacking in topics to talk about?
Well, let's move on to our next segment, School's Back for September. Joining us now for this conversation is my partner, Sonia Milbradt, who's a teacher here in Burnaby, and we'll keep you on, Shannon, because I'm sure you have perspectives from the press gallery on how BC's school restart plan is going. So, Sonia, you were on viral transmissions this last week. Well, we had no power, and so you got kind of cut off there. People should definitely listen to that episode. But just briefly from your perspective as a teacher, what exactly is going on?
So we know kind of as much as the public knows because we seem to be getting the information about at the same time. The major press conference with Rob Fleming, where the idea of cohorts was introduced, was the time when teachers were notified, the same as the public. We do get ministry updates via email, but they tend to just be look at our press release or quoting our press release. So we get a lot of secondhand information through the grapevine, through our union groups and things like that. But we're all on break right now. We don't get paid for summer break. So it's a little bit weird.
So the official word is school returning on, well, the official word was school returning on September 8th. And then just, I think it was yesterday, the day before, they updated the announcement to say school return would be delayed till the 10th or possibly sooner.
Yeah. So what I've noticed a lot of teachers talking about is that they're calling this an orientation week, as if it is a week to help us get established and develop routines. Moving from the 8th to the 10th is not a week. It is 2 days, first of all. And the other thing is that we've always kind of had a staggered start to the school year. If you even look at the younger grades, kindergarten has a very slow introduction model that's almost, I believe, 2 weeks. At the high school level, we've always just had the very first day back is an assembly. You kind of pick up your timetable, sort of admin type things. So they're not really giving us a week, and they're not even really giving us 2 days. They're giving us maybe an extra day and an hour to learn all new procedures, basically, and also develop brand new lessons that will now adhere to these new requirements or new necessities of teaching in a very enclosed environment with a lot of bodies.
So yeah, that's been kind of what I've seen as being the major criticism and uncertainty is how do the schools do this safely? And it doesn't appear to me that more orientation is the thing that's going to actually substantively change that.
Right. Yeah. So when the press conference with Rob Fleming was called and he did announce that, we're going into the stage 2 with these learning cohorts and all of that, the BCTF did have a response, and there were 5 things they actually said that they would be pushing for and looking for in order to make teachers feel safer. The first was more authentic consultation collaboration at the local level. They do seem to be having that, at least within my own union. I've noticed on our Facebook group, for example, there are members of the union, representatives of the union who are on steering committees who do feel that there is at least a chance to share. Whether or not they're being heard is another question. The BCTF also wants all measures to be in place and tested before return. So with August 26th kind of being the due date for release of the plans, that doesn't seem to be that there will be measures in place or tested. The third thing they did want was time in September to plan for orientation. Terry Mooring has been on the BCTF president has been on a couple of places in the media saying, well, we're happy to get the 2 days, although I'm sure we would appreciate much more time. But the bigger thing is the fourth and fifth request for the BCTF is smaller classes, as always, just in terms of good learning environments in general. The smaller the class, the better, more effective learning is going to take place. And especially in a pandemic environment, smaller classes means you can actually spread them out, because most of our classrooms fit 30 people side by side at tables or various collaborative environments, because that's the shift that the new curriculum has moved us towards. We don't tend not to have individualized desks that can be separated anymore. And also clarity on this cohort model, because that also creates a huge risk factor in terms of opening up these bubbles.
And Shannon, you were speaking to Terry Mooring earlier today or yesterday?
Yes, this morning I cut out of my question period live tweeting to have a conversation with Terry. I had contacted the BCTF yesterday when we got the latest adjustments to the back to school plan to see if they either had a statement or Terry had some time. And I believe she did like 24 media interviews yesterday. And so I got a chance to speak to her for a few minutes this morning. And she kind of flagged the concerns that Sonia was talking about. They are still pushing for reduced class sizes, or ways. She actually used the phrase reducing class density. I don't know if that's sort of an exchangeable term, but to me it also suggested, potentially using different spaces in the school to allow students to be spread out. Maybe that's gym space or some of the larger classrooms. The other thing the education minister has floated is outdoor classes for as long as the weather allows in certain areas. This was something that was very popular during the 1918 flu pandemic. A lot of outdoor classrooms and even outdoor hospitals at that point. They're also concerned about ventilation issues in schools. Obviously, newer builds probably have more robust ventilation and HVAC systems than some of the older schools that we have in the province. But she also flagged concerns about, classrooms that don't have any windows, or classrooms that don't have windows that open when you don't have a good ventilation system, and needing to find time to deal with some of those issues as well. She was very diplomatic about the logistics that are going into this plan and just how many complicating factors there are. The thing that has struck me about this push to get kids back to school is that there doesn't seem to be a lot of disagreement. There are concerns from parents for sure around, sending all kids back to school at the same time, not trying the hybrid model like we had in June. But everybody seems to agree that it's really important to get as many kids as possible back to something that looks like a normal classroom as soon as possible, for students' sakes and for parents' sakes. I don't know if it's so much for the teachers' sake. I have certainly heard from a lot of friends and family members who are teachers who are really worried about the timelines and the amount of issues at play and the various risks involved.
Yeah, so I think that honestly, I would not want to teach online. I don't think that that's my skill set, and I don't think that's the environment that I thrive in or enjoy. And I think there are a number of teachers who love the classroom environment, but I two, along with many teachers that you've probably heard from, am very concerned about heading back and worried, anxious about the environment. So while I want to be back in the classroom, I definitely, yes, do think more time, more understanding around what exactly this is going to look like is needed in order to make sure that it is a safe environment. In particular, at the secondary level, they seem to think that a cohort of 120 is okay, where a cohort means there's no need to physically distance or wear masks, which seems to contradict the fewer spaces in larger places. I also know that these logistical things may not be solvable. Things like the fact that my previous classroom was an interior classroom. It didn't have windows and it didn't there was no exterior. It was into a hallway. So even if I could get opening windows, they wouldn't go to the outside to get fresh air. And I know there were other exterior classrooms that their windows were not allowed to be opened during certain times of the day and things like that. So I think, yes, there's a push to have students back into that environment, and I totally want to be back in that environment. But I just think that 30 students back in my room, not wearing masks, not physically distancing, is just not an environment that myself or many teachers feel comfortable thinking about.
Yeah. So to me, it seems like the fundamental unsolved problem in the entire pandemic is how do you get a bunch of people to be in a room for multiple hours at a time without transmitting a virus? And that hasn't actually been solved anywhere. And we're just kind of pushing ahead regardless of having that problem resolved.
Yeah. The thing that kind of caught my eye this week, it came up both in the daily updates that the provincial health officer and the health minister provided, most of which this week were simply statements. But there was a lot of language around the fact that BC's plan to get kids back to school this September, they started development on it, we're told, in March. It was certainly informed by the sort of hybrid learning model that we had in June. But the assumption working from June was that we were going to have case rates and community transmission rates at a similar level to where we were in June, which is to say low. And that is not the case anymore. We are basically back to where we were at the beginning of May, if we're talking about, active cases and even some of the daily case counts that we've been seeing. And that's before school was purely online at that point in time, and you weren't supposed to be leaving your house unless you absolutely had to. You were supposed to be sort of trying to go to the grocery store as little as possible and not leaving your home community and that kind of thing. And now we're looking at trying to open schools several weeks from now, when in the past several weeks we've seen our active cases skyrocket, essentially. And so I think there is still a chance that the whole, for all the planning that's gone into it, for all the effort that's been made, for all the anxiety and uncertainty that it has caused, there is a possibility that the whole thing gets junked because our transmission rate is just too high.
Yeah, watching the modeling that came out this afternoon was rather terrifying. The charts just show this exponential increase from where we are right now at 70, 80. And so we do need to start bending that curve again, or things are going to get out of control. I mean, the one saving grace we've had is we haven't had a lot of recent deaths, largely because these cases are all in people under 40 and even largely, under 30, which is being attributed to, house parties and all these things that shouldn't be happening, or people getting too close or going to a bar when they shouldn't be. The thing that strikes me about all these house parties is that's when you get a few high school students who shouldn't be there getting sick, picking things up, and then bringing it to school, which, is worrying. So we'll have to see how things go and hopefully get it under control.
Picking up on that. So this cohort model thing they have going on here, perhaps Sonia, you should touch on or explain this a little bit. But if you have a group of 120 or even 60 people, I can see how that works if, this is a boarding school and you can, isolate people away from everyday life. But if, you have multiple intersections of the various cohorts, family members split between them, and then, there's probably going to be some socializing going on outside, and teachers may be teaching multiple cohorts, although I gather they're trying to minimize that. There starts to be enough connections there that you really can't consider a cohort to be an isolated group, right? So how's that supposed to work?
Your guess is as good as mine. So I think the biggest surprise to many with Rob Fleming's announcement about these cohorts or learning groups was just this introduction of the idea that, oh, we've come up with these numbers and this seems to be the way we can move forward safely. However, at a secondary level, with 120, there are 16 public schools in BC that are greater than 1,500 students. So if you're trying to limit people's interactions, they're going to be having to change bell schedules. They're going to be having to go through and look at every single student's timetable. And at the high school level, they can't just say, oh, okay, all the people who are taking, I don't know, Science 10 and Pre-Calculus 11 and Band 11, etc., are all going to go together, because there are so many options once they get to the grade 10, 11, 12 level. I feel like it's a logistical nightmare. I don't think it's going to be possible for the admin to come in and look at people and try to limit 8 classes for all of these students to all align somehow. It's mind-boggling to think about how admin are supposed to do this. And that's basically the mandate they've been given by the government is, look, make it work, have them only interact with 120 other students. And so they were all called back because admin teams are not supposed to be working right now either. They're all also on break. But most districts have called them back to look at timetabling and basically rejig everything, including possibly going from linear to semester or from semester to quadmester in order to try to create these cohorts, never mind if there's siblings in other cohorts, extracurriculars with other people in other cohorts. Yeah, the vice presidents and our vice principals and principals union has said they need more time on this. That was their union response. But yeah, the BC VPA asked for a flexible start date, not to be September 8th. So I guess they got 2 more days. But timetabling has already been done. Back in June, everyone already had their timetable. So they're going to have to go back and look at everything, which means that teachers can't even relook at how to rejig their courses because we might not even be teaching the same courses we thought we'd be teaching.
Yeah, I said it to Terry this morning, and I'll say it again now. Anytime I think about the logistics involved in coordinating these cohorts, classes, and they have said, we're going to be having different bell schedules. There'll be different times for recess and different times for lunch, potentially different dismissal times, like all this kind of stuff. But it just gives me a headache even thinking about it. So I can't imagine what it's like for the people who have to actually do that planning. The one thing I will say, and I think this was communicated very poorly by the province, and then the way the media tends to report things, it also sort of got twisted, but not twisted, but maybe not explained as well or as in detail as it could, is the cohort sizes are supposed to be the maximums. Like wherever possible, these groups are supposed to be smaller than 60 in the case of elementary schools and smaller than 120. Who knows how much smaller? Who knows how far that's possible? It still doesn't account for siblings and familial relationships and sort of all the other connections that one student may have. But in ideal circumstances, these will be smaller groups than the 60 to 120 that we so often talk about at this point in time. I wonder if there's even going to be band at this point. Like one of the issues that has come up again and again in these sort of tragic illustrations are like choirs that got together to practice in the spring, and then like 80% of them ended up with COVID. And I mean, if you're playing a stringed instrument, then maybe you don't have to worry so much about increasing COVID transmission, but certainly your whole brass and woodwind section is sounding like not a very good idea in COVID times.
Yeah, a saxophone sounds like a very effective COVID dispersal instrument.
Like I don't know how you do that. And we've already been told like there aren't going to be school-wide assemblies according to the province. There's not going to be intramural sports competitions, like schools probably won't be playing each other they might play, sort of within groups within the school, but there's not going to be sort of tournaments and stuff like that going on. But, from an educational standpoint, music is just such a really awesome, and I say this as an incredibly privileged individual who got to play cello for 9 years through my elementary and high school experience. Like music is such an amazing part of schooling that I feel really sad if they do end up axing all of that. But like I said, I wouldn't want to be sitting next to like a trumpet or a sax or a flute player in a small room for like 90 minutes doing band practice these days.
I think Dr. Henry suggested they could do band outside and distanced.
Which, how are you going to do that in like 95% of this province as of October? Lots of places are going to be covered in snow at that point in time. You're not going to be playing anything outside.
Oh, can you not get the marching band snowshoes as part of their uniforms?
Yeah, I was on one of the teachers' Facebook group pages, and they were saying this idea of, they can just go outside to do band or choir or drama. It just smacks of kind of a let them eat cake kind of statement.
Yeah, it just doesn't see. I mean, BC probably has a better chance of doing it than most Canadian provinces, at least, for a few weeks or months in the fall, but it's just not feasible to be outside. Like in the top half of this province and even further south, kids don't go outside at all during recess in the winter because in some places it's so cold that they can't without, risking some serious issues.
A trumpet has a metal mouthpiece, right? That seems like a really good way to freeze a trumpet to your face.
Oh, no, I hadn't even thought about that.
Well, I think we'll have to come back and learn more about this education plan as it rolls out in the coming weeks. Sonia, thanks for taking the time to join the podcast. I know you haven't listened to much.
Well, thank you for having me. Maybe I'll have to listen to this episode.
Okay, well, moving on to our only quick takes. A bunch of speculation, strategic leaks being put out to various media outlets out of Ottawa about the fate of Bill Morneau and maybe Mark Carney as well. So it was put out in the Globe earlier this week that Finance Minister Bill Morneau's job could be in jeopardy. This is after the whole We affair where he kind of forgot about the $41,000 in trip expenses he never paid and having his a family member works for We and not recusing himself. So there's speculation he may be on his way out on that, as well as apparently sources inside the PMO or the government are saying that there's maybe questions about whether he's the right person to lead the financial recovery.
The Star also had a weird leak story about Trudeau wanting to really push forward a bold, progressive agenda in the coming months. And so it kind of ties together with this image that's being painted of Morneau as being the spendthrift who wouldn't let Justin Trudeau really advance the big ticket items that he wanted to. And, maybe this is the time for a big switch up. And, Canada Land Shortcuts I was listening to just before kind of pitched it all as who exactly is benefiting from all of these, strategic leaks? Because it's clearly a channel change to talk about all of this, traditional political speculation and rather than We.
Trudeau's the one who benefits because the focus comes off him onto Morneau. Morneau's probably going to be made to be the one who wears the We scandal. And Something else that stuck out at me in the Globe article was they were talking about all of Morneau's missteps, and one of them was the proposed legislation that would give Treasury the ability to basically not have to go to Parliament for several years to raise taxes or borrow money. And like that was framed as if it was just Bill Morneau's legislation, when there was no way something that significant didn't come out of the PMO, especially with a PMO that's so tightly controlled and top down.
So we have all of that side, and then we also have this series of stories about Mark Carney being first teased as he's been named a special advisor, and now he has been officially named an advisor on the COVID-19 economic response. And this is Mark Carney, probably the most famous Bank of Canada governor, like the only one I could name. And he had also gone for a while over to the Bank of England to guide them through Brexit. So he's kind of known as
it's fairly rare to run not one, but two central banks.
And to run them competently and through some pretty tough times.
Yeah, like he's a well-respected central banker. And, not a bad person to bring on in a case where you're going to have a lot of economic fallout to deal with.
But he's not elected. But then the CBC notes that the Toronto area riding of York Centre just became vacated. So maybe he could run there, though apparently Liberal sources are throwing cold water on that idea. But it's not happening until it happens. Or maybe it will all get thrown off by the block triggering an election.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah, Blanchot wanted some headlines this week.
There's no way it's going to happen because you need the other parties to push the government into a vote of no confidence. And the Conservatives, basically a week from when you're hearing this podcast, are going to just be selecting their new leader. The NDP is in no shape to fight an election. It's not going to happen. It's the bloc trolling for media coverage.
I do hope that these rumors of a bold, ambitious agenda pan out and we see something big come from the federal government. Been some good interim steps after some shakeups, like CERB was ultimately a pretty valuable program, and there's a lot of concern about how it's going to roll into EI in the coming months. CCPA put out a really strong point about if no changes are made to EI, like a vast majority of people who are on CERB are going to be hung out to dry. And so there's work that needs to be done there because people haven't recovered yet. We were talking earlier about the need for federal sick leave that was promised and hasn't come forward yet. Childcare has been on the Liberal agenda for 30 years, 20 years, hasn't come forward yet. So there's a lot of room to do a lot. I just need to see it.
Yeah, and in that sense, I can kind of see why Morneau may be hung, because I don't think they're wrong that Morneau is not exactly a person to lead transformational change. His tenure as finance minister is being undistinguished, save for a few scandals and what was probably pre-Black or pre-SNC Lavalin, the rockiest time for the Liberal government when they tried to do that small business tax change thing a couple of years back. He is very much a kind of stay the course finance minister, which is usually a pretty good thing, but doesn't exactly seem to be even a Jim Flaherty level finance minister. So maybe not the worst idea to do a cabinet shuffle. And of course, cabinet shuffle speculation is the only thing that is more common than early election speculation.
And I mean, we could speculate all evening here on where federal politics is going to go, but I think we'll have to wait and see. Not much else is happening this summer. It's a wait and see kind of end to the show, I guess.
Don't say not much else is happening. Those are dangerous words.
I like to live dangerously.
If nothing else, it should give us content for the next couple of weeks.
Sure.
Thanks for joining us, Shannon.
Always good to have a chat about politics.
Yeah, so before we sign off, can you just let our listeners know where they can find you?
Yes, and this time I will get our website right, because I did not have the suffix down last time. So if you're looking for my writing on BC politics, as well as some selections from my colleagues in Alberta and Ontario, or you're looking for a free trial, you can go to politicstoday.news. If you're interested in how I spend my time on social media, my official All BC Poly All the Time account is at BC Today Official. That includes color commentary on Question Period when I don't have other interviews to do. And if you have never seen pictures of my cat and also Ian's 2 cats, because they are frequently in my feed, as well as a little more snark and a little more feminism, I'm at So Bitter, So Sweet on Twitter.
Shannon, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And that has been Politoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our Slack channel at patreon.com/politoast. Our intro music credit is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikoff. Politoast is a production of Lead and Boot Media, and editing services are provided by CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Wash your hands and stay home. Thanks for listening.